There's a pattern most men notice, but never name. A woman says one thing, rewards another, and the gap between those two realities isn't small. It's the difference between what works and what doesn't, between confusion and clarity, between repeated failure and sudden understanding. You've probably felt it, that moment when you did everything right according to the rules you were given, and watched interest disappear anyway. You were attentive, available, emotionally present, and somehow that became the problem. Not because you failed, but because you succeeded at the wrong game. The game you were told to play, the one that sounds correct in theory but collapses in practice. And the strangest part? The women involved couldn't tell you why it didn't work either. Not because they're hiding something, but because what they respond to doesn't translate cleanly into language. It exists in the realm of demonstration, pressure, and consequence. It's felt before it's understood, registered before it's explained. And it operates on rules that contradict almost everything men are socially conditioned to believe. So here's the question worth asking. What if the confusion isn't random? What if there's a hidden structure beneath it? A set of psychological realities that explain why certain behaviors are rewarded and others aren't? What if the gap between stated preference and actual response isn't contradiction, but translation error? Because once you see the structure, everything that seemed irrational starts making perfect sense. The tests, the withdrawals, the sudden shifts in interest. They're not arbitrary. They're diagnostic. And what they're diagnosing is something most men never learn to control. Women don't reward what men say. They reward what men demonstrate under pressure. This is the part most men never hear, because it isn't taught and it isn't spoken. It's learned through outcomes. And the men who figure it out rarely explain it. They just operate differently. They hold frames when others collapse. They stay centered when emotion floods the room. They disengage cleanly when most men spiral into bitterness. And they do all of this without announcement, without performance, without needing the woman to understand why it works. They just know. And that knowing changes everything. What women reward in men is not effort. It's not kindness. It's not even a commitment. What they reward is a specific kind of internal state that manifests as behavior under pressure. The first element of that state is emotional self-containment. Not emotional numbness, not coldness, not detachment from feeling, but the ability to feel without leaking need, insecurity, or dependency into the interaction. Most men operate from a place of emotional porousness. They feel something and immediately externalize it. They seek reassurance. They ask for validation. They monitor the other person's response to determine whether they should feel secure. This creates a dynamic where the woman becomes responsible for managing the man's emotional stability. And the moment that responsibility is felt, attraction weakens. It doesn't weaken because she dislikes him. It weakens because the frame has inverted. He is now the one seeking approval. She is now the one granting access. And that inversion is registered at a level that precedes conscious thought. The man who rewards himself emotionally, who regulates his own state without external input, sends a different signal entirely. He communicates that his internal equilibrium is not contingent on her response, that he feels what he feels, but those feelings do not destabilize him. This is not performed. It cannot be faked. It's either present or it isn't. And when it's present, it's silently rewarded. Not with words, not with declarations, but with increased proximity, sustained attention, and behaviors that indicate interest. The reward structure operates beneath the level of explanation. It's biological, it's evolutionary, it's older than language. And it doesn't respond to what a man says he is. It responds to what he proves he is when tested. The second element is detachment from outcome. This is the piece that trips most men into paradox. They're told to pursue, to show interest, to make their intentions clear. And all of that is accurate up to a point. The problem arises when pursuit becomes attachment. When a man's emotional state, his sense of worth, his perceived success becomes dependent on being chosen by a specific woman. The moment that dependency is sensed, the dynamic collapses. Not because women dislike being wanted, but because psychological attachment to a specific outcome reveals scarcity. It reveals that the man views this interaction as rare, irreplaceable, or uniquely significant. And that perception contradicts the frame of abundance that attraction requires. A man who is psychologically attached to being chosen is a man who has already surrendered leverage. He has made her approval the central variable in his emotional economy, and that makes him predictable, controllable, and ultimately less compelling. Detachment, by contrast, signals the opposite. It communicates that the man's life continues with or without this, that he is not collapsed into the outcome, that he has options, standards, and a framework that exists independently of her response. This doesn't mean indifference. Indifference is absence of investment. Detachment is presence without dependency. The difference is subtle but decisive. A man who is detached can be fully engaged in the moment while remaining emotionally unshaken by rejection, delay, or disapproval. That combination, engagement without need, is what creates sustainable attraction. And it's rewarded consistently, though never verbally acknowledged. The third element is the ability to hold boundaries under emotional pressure. Most men collapse their standards the moment emotion enters the room. They tolerate behavior they said they wouldn't tolerate. They renegotiate their non-negotiables. They compromise on things they claimed were essential. And they do this because they prioritize harmony over congruence. They believe that flexibility will be rewarded, that understanding will be appreciated, that accommodation will generate reciprocity. But the opposite occurs. Every boundary that's renegotiated is a signal that the man's frame is unstable, that his standards are conditional, that he can be moved through emotional pressure, guilt, or withdrawal of approval. And once that pattern is established, respect erodes. Not consciously, not deliberately, but inevitably. Women reward men who do not shift under pressure, who say what they mean and mean what they say, who remain congruent even when it risks conflict, discomfort, or loss of access. This isn't rigidity, it's an internal authority. It's the capacity to hold a position not because it's easy, but because it reflects something non-negotiable about the man's identity and standards. That congruence is tested repeatedly, through emotional escalation, through subtle boundary violations, through behaviors designed to measure how much the man will tolerate to preserve the interaction. And the men who pass those tests, who remain unmoved without becoming cruel, are the ones who retain attraction long-term, because they've demonstrated that their frame is not for sale. The fourth element is emotional unpredictability within a stable frame. This is often misunderstood. Women do not reward behavioral chaos. They do not reward inconsistency of values. What they reward is a man whose character is predictable, but whose emotional reactions are not easily manipulated. Most men are emotionally transparent in a way that eliminates tension. Their approval can be assumed. Their reactions can be forecasted. Their emotional state is a direct reflection of how they're being treated. This makes them easy to read, easy to predict, and easy to control. And control, once established, kills attraction. It doesn't kill affection, it doesn't kill partnership, but it removes the element of uncertainty that sustains interest. A man who maintains emotional variability, who does not respond the same way twice to the same stimulus, introduces complexity into the dynamic. He becomes harder to map. His approval cannot be assumed. His emotional state is not a function of external input. This creates a kind of psychological tension that sustains attention. Not through games, not through intentional distance, but through genuine independence of response. The woman cannot predict how he'll react because his reactions are rooted in his internal state, not in her behavior. That unpredictability, contained within a stable set of values, is silently rewarded because it prevents the interaction from becoming emotionally flat. The fifth element is the ability to walk away without bitterness. This is the final test most men fail. They can maintain boundaries for a time. They can project detachment. They can regulate their emotional state under moderate pressure. But when the interaction ends, when access is denied or interest fades, they collapse into resentment. They demand explanations. They request closure. They express anger, disappointment, or betrayal. And in doing so, they reveal that the detachment was performance, that the boundaries were negotiation tactics, that the self-containment was temporary. The ability to disengage cleanly, without rage, without bitterness, without pursuit, is the ultimate demonstration of internal sufficiency. It communicates that the man's sense of worth is not tied to the outcome of this specific interaction, that he has options, that he respects her decision without needing to punish it, that he can lose access without losing self-respect. This is not about being unaffected. It's about being able to process disappointment privately, without turning it into leverage or emotional debt. Walking away calmly sends a message that lands long after the interaction ends. It reframes the entire dynamic retroactively. It forces a reassessment of what the man represented, because most men, when rejected, react in ways that confirm the rejection was correct. They become bitter, desperate, or vindictive, and that behavior validates the decision to disengage. The man who walks away cleanly does the opposite. He leaves the door open, not for reconciliation, but for respect. And that respect often translates into renewed interest, though never guaranteed. The hidden rule beneath all of this is simple. Women don't reward effort, they reward leverage. Leverage comes from emotional independence, behavioral consistency, and the willingness to lose access rather than lose self-respect. Men are never told this because it contradicts what they're socially conditioned to believe. They're taught that care, attention, and emotional expressiveness will be rewarded. And in certain contexts, they are. But in the context of attraction, what's rewarded is something older and less verbal. It's the capacity to remain centered when pressure increases, to hold a frame when emotion enters the room, to walk away when the cost of staying exceeds the value of the interaction. That capacity isn't taught. It's developed through experience, consequence, and the willingness to prioritize internal coherence over external validation. Ignore this, and the confusion repeats. The same patterns, the same outcomes, the same sense that something fundamental is being missed. Understand it, and behavior starts making sense. Not because the rules change, but because the lens through which you interpret behavior finally aligns with how attraction actually operates. And once that alignment occurs, everything that seemed contradictory becomes legible. The tests make sense. The withdrawals make sense. The rewards make sense. Because you're no longer interpreting them through a framework designed to obscure the truth. You're seeing them as they are. And in that clarity, the path forward becomes obvious.